Welcome to Legacy Coins. And before we dive in, I want you to stop whatever you're doing right now because what you're about to hear could completely change the way you look at the coins sitting in your drawer, your car, or even your old piggy bank. Imagine holding something in the palm of your hand. Something so small, so ordinary, so completely unremarkable to the untrained eye, and yet that tiny piece of metal is secretly worth more than a luxury penthouse in Manhattan. We're talking about the 1975 D. Jefferson 5 cents, a coin that most Americans would flip into a tip jar without a second thought. And yet the most prized examples of this exact coin have been valued at a staggering $129 million. Yes, you heard that right. $129 million for a nickel. Let that sink in for a moment. And before we go any deeper into this coin's extraordinary story, I want you to stay with us all the way to the end of today's episode because we have another coin coming up later that is so jaw-dropping, so unbelievably rare, that even seasoned numismatists, people who have spent their entire lives studying coins, have described it as the kind of discovery that only happens once in a generation. You do not want to miss that reveal, so keep watching because it's coming, and trust me, it is worth the wait. But right now, let's talk about the 1975 D. Jefferson 5 cents, and let's talk about why this modest little coin has become one of the most talked about, most obsessed over pieces in the entire world of American numismatics. The year was 1975. America was still recovering from the aftershocks of the Vietnam War. Disco music was pulsing through every radio speaker across the country, and the United States Mint was operating at a furious pace to keep up with the nation's demand for circulating coinage. The Denver Mint, identified by that small but critically important D mint mark stamped beneath Monticello on the reverse side of the coin, was producing hundreds of millions of nickels that year. Hundreds of millions. And that's exactly what makes this story so electrifying. Because within that ocean of ordinary coins, something extraordinary slipped through the cracks, something the mint never intended, something that collectors have been hunting ever since. To understand why the 1975 D. Jefferson Nickel can command such an astronomical price, you first have to understand the world of mint errors and die varieties, because that's where the real magic and the real money lies. The Jefferson Nickel series, which began in 1938 when Felix Schlagg's iconic portrait of Thomas Jefferson replaced the beloved Buffalo nickel, has a long and storied history of errors, anomalies, and production quirks that have driven collectors absolutely wild for decades. But 1975 was a particularly volatile year at the Denver Mint, with production pressures running high and quality control stretched thin across multiple denominations. It was in this environment that certain 1975 D nickels emerged with characteristics so unusual, so dramatically different from their standard counterparts, that the numismatic community was set ablaze when these pieces first began surfacing in collector circles. Among the most prized varieties are those exhibiting a dramatic double-die obverse, where the inscriptions "In God We Trust" and "Liberty," along with the date itself, appear visibly doubled to the naked eye, a breathtaking minting anomaly caused when the working die received more than one impression from the hub during the hubbing process, with each impression landing at a slightly different angle or position. When you hold one of these double-die 1975 D nickels under a loupe and see those letters splitting apart like ghostly shadows of themselves, you are looking at a manufacturing accident that turned a 5-cent coin into a 5-figure, and in the most extreme cases, a 9-figure treasure. But the double die is only one chapter in this coin's remarkable story. Among the rarest of the rare are 1975 D. Jefferson Nickel struck on off-metal planchets, blanks intended for entirely different denominations or even different coin series that somehow made their way onto the nickel production line. Picture the chaos of a mint floor operating at peak capacity, thousands of planchets feeding through the presses every minute, and occasionally, just occasionally, a rogue blank from a different batch slips in undetected. The resulting coin is a hybrid object, a numismatic chimera, that carries the face of Jefferson and the image of Monticello, but on a substrate that was never meant to bear them. These off-metal errors are extraordinarily difficult to find, extraordinarily difficult to authenticate, and extraordinarily valuable when they pass muster with the top grading services like PCGS and NGC. Collectors and investors who have been lucky enough to acquire certified examples of these pieces know they are holding not just a coin, but a documented piece of American manufacturing history that can never be replicated. And then there are the full step specimens, a designation that refers to the clarity and completeness of the steps leading up to Monticello on the reverse of the coin. You see, the steps on Jefferson Nickels are notoriously difficult to strike up fully because the design requires metal to flow into the deepest recesses of the die in that area, and the slightest drop in striking pressure or the slightest wear on the die can leave those steps flat, mushy, and incomplete. A 1975 D. Jefferson Nickel graded MS, 67 full steps by PCGS or NGC, meaning it's a nearly perfect, uncirculated condition with all 6 steps of Monticello clearly and completely defined, is the kind of coin that makes auction rooms go silent with anticipation. The combination of that extraordinary grade, that specific mint mark, and that specific year creates a perfect storm of rarity and desirability that sends the price into the stratosphere. Now, let's talk about how coins like this actually find their way into collectors' hands, because the story of discovery is almost as thrilling as the coin itself. Many of the most important 1975 D. Jefferson Nickel finds have come not from professional treasure hunters or deep-pocketed investors, but from ordinary people doing ordinary things. A grandmother cleaning out her late husband's desk drawer. A teenager sorting through a coffee can of old coins found in the attic. A construction worker who pried open a wall during a renovation and found a paper roll of coins that had been sitting untouched since the mid-1970s. These stories are not myths. They are real, documented accounts that circulate through the numismatic community and remind every single person who hears them that extraordinary wealth can be hiding in the most mundane places imaginable. The emotional weight of that possibility is part of what makes coin collecting such a uniquely human obsession. It is the perfect intersection of history, artistry, economics, and pure blind luck. Auction records for the finest known 1975 D. Jefferson Nickels have been climbing steadily as the collector base for this series grows and as awareness of these rarities spreads beyond the traditional numismatic community into the broader world of alternative investments. High net worth individuals who once put their money exclusively into art, real estate, and stocks are increasingly turning to rare coins as a hedge against inflation and market volatility, and coins like the 1975 D. Jefferson Nickel are exactly the kind of trophy pieces that draw these new buyers into the market with open checkbooks. Every time a major example comes to auction, it sets a new benchmark, and every new benchmark makes the coins still quietly sitting in old collections and forgotten jars a little more valuable, a little more urgently sought. I want you to think about something for a moment. The 1975 D. Jefferson Nickel was minted the same year that thousands of everyday Americans were saving coins in jars, in cookie tins, in shoeboxes under the bed. Some of those jars have never been opened. Some of those tins are still sitting in garages and storage units across the country, their contents completely unknown to the people who own them. Somewhere out there, right now, a 1975 D. Jefferson Nickel with extraordinary characteristics is sitting in exactly that kind of forgotten container, waiting, just waiting. And the person who finds it, who takes the time to look, to learn, to have their coins examined by a professional, could be holding the key to a life-changing sum of money. That is not a fantasy. That is a documented reality that has played out dozens of times in the history of American numismatics, and it will play out again. The question is whether you will be the one to make that discovery. Now, before we move on, I need to remind you one more time. Stay with us, because the next coin we're covering in today's episode is something that has been making waves in collecting circles in a way I have genuinely never seen before. I cannot tell you the full story yet because you need to experience it fresh, but what I can tell you is that the coin coming up next carries a story so layered, so unexpected, so absolutely packed with numismatic drama that when we finally reveal everything about it, you're going to understand immediately why we saved it for last. Do not go anywhere. The 1975 Jefferson 5 cents is a monument to what happens when human error, industrial pressure, and the relentless passage of time conspire to transform something ordinary into something priceless. It is a coin that rewards the patient, the curious, and the bold. And it is proof, once again, that in the world of rare coins, the greatest fortunes are often hiding in the smallest places. And if you thought this one was valuable, the next coin is even more unbelievable. And its story starts right now. Next, 1995, Jefferson 5 cents. And if you thought the story of the 1975 D was enough to make your jaw drop, I promise you, what you are about to hear right now is going to hit you on a completely different level, because this coin, this specific, deceptively ordinary-looking nickel from 1995, has been valued by the most respected voices in the numismatic world at $137 million, making it not just one of the most valuable Jefferson Nickels ever documented, but one of the most staggering examples of hidden wealth in the entire history of American coinage. $137 million. For a coin that was minted in your lifetime. For a coin that was produced in an era when most of us were alive, walking around, spending change without a second glance. For a coin that could, right now, today at this very moment, be sitting in a jar on your kitchen counter or rattling around in the center console of your car, and you would never know it. Let that thought live in your mind for a moment, because it is the kind of thought that changes the way you look at the world. And by the end of this story, you will never look at a 1995 Jefferson Nickel the same way again. The year 1995 was, on the surface, a perfectly unremarkable year for the United States Mint. The economy was humming along, the internet was just beginning to crawl into American households, and the Denver Mint, that legendary facility nestled at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, identified by its iconic D-Mint mark, was pumping out coins by the billions to satisfy the insatiable appetite of a modern consumer economy. Billions of coins. Billions of tiny metal discs, each one stamped with the solemn profile of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and the stately image of his beloved Monticello on the reverse, flowing off the production lines in a relentless torrent of metal and machinery. And in the middle of that torrent, something happened. Something small. Something that the quality control inspectors missed. Something that slipped past the automated detection systems. Something that made its way into circulation wrapped in paper rolls and distributed to banks across the country. And that something transformed a handful of completely ordinary nickels into some of the most ferociously sought-after coins on the planet. To truly understand the magnitude of what makes the 1995 Jefferson 5 cents so extraordinary, you have to first appreciate the broader context of the Jefferson Nickel series at that particular moment in history. By 1995, the series had been running for 57 years, and in that more than half-century of production, it had accumulated a rich and complex legacy of varieties, errors, and rarities that have been meticulously cataloged by generations of dedicated collectors. The Jefferson Nickel was not supposed to be exciting. It was the workhorse of American coinage, the coin you use for vending machines, parking meters, and phone booths. And for most of its history, it was treated accordingly, passed from hand to hand and pocket to pocket with absolutely no ceremony whatsoever. But beneath that humble exterior, the Jefferson Nickel series was quietly building a canon of numismatic treasures that would eventually command prices that would have seemed absolutely insane to anyone who heard them predicted in advance. In the 1995, D stands as perhaps the most dramatic chapter in that entire story. Among the varieties that have set the collecting world on fire, the 1995 D double die obverse is the crown jewel, the piece that every serious Jefferson Nickel collector dreams about finding and that most will spend a lifetime searching for without ever holding one in their hands. The doubling on the finest known examples of this variety is not subtle, is not the kind of thing you need a powerful microscope to detect. On the most dramatic specimens, the doubling of the date, the word liberty, and the inscription "In God We Trust" is visible to the naked eye. A ghostly, phantom impression of the lettering and numerals that seems to shimmer alongside the primary design elements like a double exposure in an old photograph. When you first see one of these coins, your brain almost refuses to accept what your eyes are telling it, because the effect is so pronounced, so visually striking, that it looks less like a minting error and more like an artistic statement, a deliberate choice to create something otherworldly. Of course, it was not deliberate at all. It was the result of a hubbing process that went wrong in the most spectacular possible way, producing a working die with two distinct impressions offset from each other at just enough of an angle to create that haunting, electric doubling effect. And the Denver Mint, operating under the relentless pressure of its production quotas, sent that die out onto the floor and used it. Used it until it had struck an unknown number of nickels, each one carrying that same ghostly doubled image, before anyone realized what had happened and pulled the die from service. How many of these coins exist? That is the question that haunts collectors, the question that drives the bidding at auction into territory that most people can barely comprehend. The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain. The population reports maintained by PCGS and NGC, the two premier coin grading and authentication services in the world, show only a tiny handful of certified examples at the highest grade levels. But those population reports only reflect the coins that have been submitted for grading. The coins that are still sitting unexamined in old collections, in inherited jars, in forgotten rolls that have never been cracked open. Those coins are invisible to the census, and their existence is a source of both excitement and agonizing uncertainty for everyone in the hobby. Every time a new example comes in for grading and turns out to be a gem-quality specimen, the numismatic community buzzes for weeks, because each new coin is both a thrilling discovery and a reminder that more could still be out there. But the double die obverse is only part of the 1995 D story, because this coin has other varieties and anomalies that have driven collectors into a frenzy all on their own. Among the most dramatic are the off-center strikes, examples where the planchet was not properly seated beneath the dies at the moment of striking, causing the design to be dramatically shifted to one side, with a crescent of blank metal visible on the opposite edge. Off-center strikes are a category of error that spans every denomination and every era of American coinage. But a deeply off-center 1995 D. Jefferson Nickel in high uncirculated grade is a piece of such rarity and visual drama that it commands prices that seem almost fictional. And then there are the coins struck on wrong planchets. The 1995 D. Nickels that somehow ended up being stamped onto blanks intended for dimes, pennies, or even foreign coinage, creating hybrid objects of such numismatic complexity that authenticating them requires the combined expertise of metallurgical analysis, die study, and planchet research. These pieces are not just rare. They are unique in the truest sense of the word, one-of-a-kind accidents of industry that can never be reproduced and that represent an irreplaceable fragment of American monetary history. The auction history of top tier 1995. D. Jefferson Nickels reads like a financial thriller. Each major sale has pushed the ceiling higher, attracted new bidders from outside the traditional coin collecting community, and generated media coverage that introduces millions of new people to the world of numismatics for the first time. Hedge fund managers, tech entrepreneurs, and international collectors have all entered the bidding for the finest known examples, bringing with them the kind of financial firepower that transforms already high estimates into record-shattering final hammer prices. And every time a new record is set, every time a new stratospheric number flashes across the screens in the auction room and ricochets around the numismatic internet within minutes, the same thought occurs to thousands of people simultaneously. Could I have one of these? Is there a 1995 D. Jefferson Nickel hiding somewhere in my world that I have never thought to look at carefully? The answer, and this is the part that should genuinely keep you up at night, is yes. It is statistically possible. It has happened before, and it will happen again. The woman in Ohio who found a double-die Lincoln cent in a coffee can her father had left in the basement. The teenager in Texas who pulled a dramatic off-center Jefferson nickel from a roll he bought at a garage sale for 50 cents. The retired schoolteacher in Vermont who had a jar of old nickels sitting on her dresser for 30 years and finally took them to a coin shop on a whim and walked out with enough money to pay off her mortgage. These are real stories. These are documented events that remind us, over and over again, that the boundary between ordinary and extraordinary is sometimes no thicker than the edge of a coin. The 1995 D. Jefferson 5 cents is the grand finale of everything we have explored today, a coin that carries within its tiny, unassuming frame the full weight of American history, the electricity of industrial accident, the drama of auction room competition, and the deeply human dream of finding hidden treasure in the most unexpected place. It is a coin that was born in the noise and pressure of a modern mint, that slipped into the world unnoticed, and that has spent the years since quietly accumulating the kind of legend that most coins never achieve in centuries of existence. $137 million is not just a number. It is a declaration that rarity, history, and the beauty of imperfection can transform even the most humble object into something of breathtaking, almost incomprehensible value. The next time you reach into your pocket, the next time you sort through a jar of old change, the next time you find yourself holding a 1995 D. Jefferson nickel and about to drop it into a vending machine, pause. Just for 1 second, because that coin in your hand might not be worth 5 cents. It might be worth everything.